good afternoon to our general public who has joined us here to the Grand Rapids Community College work session. At this work session this afternoon, we have three matters that we're going to dig into. Trustees, we're going to do a deep dive into the draft of the 21-22 operational budget. You recall we did a review of 5 board policies. We're going to take a final look at those to make sure that we're all in agreement on the language of those. And then the third item is to take a look at a summary document that attempts to clarify our understanding of policy governance. Before we go any further, though, we do need to introduce ourselves and indicate where we are for this virtual meeting. So I will start. I'm Dave Cucci, and I am in my office in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm going to go across my screen here. Cheryl, you're the next on my screen.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cucci and President Cucci. Cheryl Siegel, and I am also in Kent County, speaking from Grand Rapids.
Thank you. Kenyatta?
Kenyatta Brahim, and I am on the Zoom from Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Thank you. Trustee Williams?
Daniel Williams, Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Trustee Lovelady Mitchell?
Brandy Lovelady Mitchell, Kent County, Michigan.
Trustee Crosby? You're muted.
Kathy Crosby, Grandville, Michigan.
Thank you. Trustee Brynsma?
Kathleen Brynsma. I'm in Chicago, Illinois, where I am because of a family illness.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's turn it over to you, Dr. Pink, and your staff, and walk us through what you feel is important for us as we begin to wrap our arms around a budget that needs our approval down the road.
Thank you, Chairperson Cucci. And again, good afternoon to our trustees. It's good to see everyone. Happy Monday. I wanted to spend some time here in myself and Mrs. Freiberger giving you some overview information of what this 21-22 budget and how we have not only what we have determined, but what we've how we got to that point. I will say that, as you are aware, and as we've been very much in keeping you in close information about this budget, as much as we have over the last 12 months through this pandemic and what a pandemic has brought to budgets across the country, we wanted to let you know where this what our picture looks like and how we are proceeding in getting this 21-22 budget squared away, where we feel very confident with the numbers that you are going to see today. And as we get through this budget season, I feel very confident about those and what we've been seeing as far as forecast is concerned. So with that, I'm going to ask Lisa Freiberger, our Vice President of Finance Administration, to share with you what we're looking at, not only in finishing out where we are now, but also what this next fiscal year will entail. So, Mrs. Freiberger.
Thank you and good afternoon. You think I'd have that down by now. I actually have 2 documents to share with you. The first one I'm just going to bring up briefly, and you received all of the actual budget documents, I believe, in your packet already. But the first actual proposed budget document I want to bring up and just walk through so that all of you, and particularly our newer trustees, have a sense of more of the line item detail and how to go through that packet. And then I'm going to transition to a PowerPoint that will give everyone more of a high level overview of where we are sitting, both with the current fiscal year. I always think it's good to give you a brief update as to where this fiscal year is sitting, and then move into what we are looking at from a projection standpoint for next year. That PowerPoint will also include some next steps, so that you know where we're heading between now and ultimate request for your approval of the 21-22 budget. So I'm going to bring up this document, assuming I can make that work. In addition, in your packet, which I will not bring up, but would be happy to answer any questions if you have them, you also received a one-page schedule of transfers. We have always prepared that separately so that you can clearly see what's transferring between funds and it's not hidden in a document. And then you also received a description or a narrative change of what's different between 2021 and proposed 21-22. Again, I'm not going to bring those up, but would be happy to answer any questions at any point if you have them on those documents as well. So with that, why am I not able to do that? Let's bring this up, go back here. There. All right. Are we okay? And can you see my screen?
Yep, we see it.
Yes.
All right. So this is the actual, what you will officially adopt or consider for adoption in June. And again, I just want to walk through briefly. We won't go through all of these numbers, but I want you to have a good sense of what's in here and how to find anything that you might be looking for. This document, as you can see by the agenda or the table of contents, if you will, includes our general operating fund, which is where the bulk of our revenue and expenditures to run the institution reside, as well as our expendable restricted. That is where all of our grant funds are. Our designated fund, that is primarily our training solutions and customized training, but also has some other smaller allocations there. Our auxiliary funds, that is where our parking, our food service, our bookstore reside. And then our plant fund, which incorporates both our building and site, so where you see all of our construction, as well as our debt service. So this document, again, has all of that. Most of what we focus on is our general fund. Again, everyone see this okay?
Mhm.
This concludes our high level revenue and expenditures for a general fund. As we consistently talk about, you know, the revenue in our general fund comes from tuition and fees, comes from property taxes, and comes from state aid. You can see in this proposed budget where we closed our most recently completed fiscal year end, or 1920. Those are actual numbers. The mid-year 2021 or current year budget that you approved in February, and then the proposed for next year. Those three are provided for your comparison purposes, so you can see what in total is changing from one to the next. We will go over some of the assumptions built into all of these as we go through the PowerPoint. But again, you can see primarily our revenue is coming from tuition and fees, property taxes, and state aid. On the expense side of the equation in general fund, well over 85% of our expenses, as they should be, are in salaries and fringe benefits. We are a service entity providing service to our students and our community. Again, we'll talk through the assumptions, but fairly consistent numbers there. And then you can also look at details for the other line items incorporated in what we would call non-salary or controllable expenditures. As you flip back in the document, you will see a greater level of detail. For example, tuition is broken out between resident, non-resident, and out of state. So you can see those comparisons. You can see a listing of the fees and where those primary fees are derived. And the detail continues as we move down through. There's a list of our property taxes. Most of it is just basic property taxes, but our IFT, CFT, you can see there. State aid, and then where our miscellaneous revenue comes from, that's incorporated into the top. Likewise, all of our salaries are detailed, so you can see those and move down through. Again, don't want to spend, unless there are questions, and then I'm happy to, too much detail in here, too much time in here, but wanted you to have a good sense of how to walk through the document. So that you could certainly, you know, spend some time and raise any questions that you might want. You will see our summary of net assets proposed on page 9 of this document for general fund. Again, we will look at this in the PowerPoint as well, but our ending net assets or fund balance, as you can see here, is right now fairly consistent between where we're closing this year and proposed next year. So our proposed next year budget is virtually balanced, $125,000 surplus on, in essence, $115 million budget. Our expendable restricted, again, all of our grants would be on page 11. The detail is very much the same, broken down between salaries and non-salaries, revenue between local, state, and federal. We'll point out that the majority of the federal revenue here is our Pell Grant. So our Pell Grant revenue that students use flows through here as both revenue, and then down under other, that large other expense is the Pell Grant expense going out to students. Our other federal grants are in here as well, but again, the bulk of that is Pell, when you see such a large number. And then the same pattern, the detail, in a little bit more detail, will follow behind all of those. Any questions in this document before I close it out and move on to the PowerPoint?
Anyone?
Would you like me to just continue and go right into the PowerPoint, or do you? Yes.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Okay. Can you all see my PowerPoint now? Did I do that successfully? Thank you.
Good.
Now my slides aren't transitioning. It's not helpful. All right, there they move. All right, so again, broad overview of what we're looking at for the upcoming budget. Would like to start with this year. So 2021, where we're standing today. As we talked through with mid-year, we are continuing to see a very positive budget. So as we close this fiscal year at June 30th, 2021, we will close in a significantly positive position. A lot of that is due to the federal stimulus money that is running through this budget, which is hugely helpful. And we are really being able to serve our students and to meet a lot of the COVID-related, pandemic-related needs with those resources. It's just important to remember as we move into the next several years, really beyond 21, 22 and into 22, 23 and beyond that. When we don't have that federal money, we're just going to need to continue to monitor that, because again, that is really impacting us this year, and you will see it will really impact us next year as well. All of that said, summer enrollment is coming in very positive. We've getting ready in another week to start summer courses. And then clearly we have 2 summer sessions this year and next. So full impact is not yet available, but our billing units coming in for summer as they stand now have exceeded our budget, which is a great news and a great sign as we move out of the 2020, 2021 year.
But Lisa, is that ratio still 80% online and 20% in person?
For summer, I believe that it is. Moving into fall, we will see more online classes. Dr. Pink?
More online, you think?
Oh, I'm sorry, more in person.
Okay.
More in person.
And I will tell you that what we're doing for the summer is trying to, especially since we have 2 summer sessions, it's helpful. What we're looking at for that second summer session is if we are sensing that more of a demand for our in-person instruction is there, we can definitely address that. But right now, I will tell you that a lot of that enrollment is rolling in with a lot of, about 75% of these classes are virtual or online. And for us to be this far ahead, 1 week out from summer classes starting, to be this far ahead is really a positive result right now of what our students are telling us. And some of those are guest students, Trustee Brain. Guest students are students who go to university and are coming home for the summer and enrolling in classes. We have a healthy number of guest students who are already enrolled. So summer looks really good. And to that point, fall, we'll start moving that needle back in terms of that ratio of in-person to online.
When we look at our other revenue sources for this fiscal year, property taxes are continuing to come in better than budget. Interest revenue is not, as rates, as we all know, continue to be very low. And then we have, and we'll talk a little bit more about federal revenue in a couple slides, but our next award, the CRISA funding, as it's called, of $15.3 million, we did receive that official award in January, and there will be impact to this fiscal year's numbers. Again, we'll talk about that more in another slide. But again, just a reminder that there is federal revenue running through these budgets with a somewhat significant impact. On the expense side of the current year, we again continue to see positive budget variance. There's underspending in non-salary budgets across the board. Almost across every department and division. We're seeing that a lot in travel, which makes perfect sense. People haven't traveled. We had travel budgets. We're seeing it a lot in some of our supplies, printing, that's not happening as much, and just a variety of costs that just are based on the way we've been working the past year. We also have a significant number of vacancies, some of which are intentional as we've kind of delayed filling as we've been working remotely. So there will be some positive salary budget savings there. And we have allocated federal revenue, some of CRISA, which we'll talk about in a minute. But even as we go back to the federal revenue updates, we have had as early as part of mid-year and then last October, we have used some of our first two allocations, the CARES funding, or HERF 1, if you will, and then the Coronavirus Relief Act funding that came through the state. We've been able to use those dollars to help with some of our pandemic-related costs, supplies and materials for cleaning and extra sanitation. We've been able to use those for some salaries of personnel, and particularly our facilities and campus police areas that we've reallocated their work assignments to really address COVID-related issues. So that does have an implication for this year's budget.
So when we look at all of our expenses, are there any expenses that occurred pre-COVID that you think, you know what, that's a thing of the past and we won't be dealing with that type of expense anymore?
I think we will see some resetting of expenses, particularly on the non-salary side. And Dr. Pink has challenged us all to look as we have vacancies, and we have a number of them. We have a number of retirements this year. He's challenged all of us to look at those and see what opportunities we might have for restructure or redefining roles. So I think we will see some of that change. And then I think, to your point, with the non-salaries, printing is a great example of that. Well, we've done without a lot of that for a year. That will probably hold into the future. I think we're finding different ways to work. So I think we will see some of that move forward. I also think we might see some different expenses or different needs arise as we move into next year.
Do teaching loads change from a virtual to an in-person, or are they pretty one-for-one? You don't have a different teaching load when you have virtual classes versus having in-person classes?
You don't have a different teaching load, no. We have had changes in numbers of students in classrooms. There are contractual limits on virtual classes. And then we have, in our on-ground classes, for social distancing purposes, reduced numbers of students in classrooms, but not numbers of classes taught, if that was the question. All right, so just a brief update on federal stimulus. Again, we are really in our third allocation now, if you count what we got from the state. So if you remember, we received an original allocation last spring, the CARES Act money. There was $3.4 million for the institution and $3.4 million approximately that went out directly to students. Those dollars have been allocated. We have talked through how we've used those dollars. And then early fall, we received an allocation of federal money through the state, the coronavirus relief funds. That was actually federal Department of Treasury dollars that came to us through the state. And those help to offset some of the payroll costs that we've been talking about. Both allocations were used significantly to purchase technology or to account for technology needs, buying laptops to loan out to students, hotspots. We also use those dollars to waive for students our online fees in both cases. The third allocation here, or what's now known as CARISA, if you will, with the acronym up there, or the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, that award was officially done at the federal level very late December of 20. We received our award notifications in mid-January of 21, and we are finalizing those budgets now. There was some significant challenge in getting federal approval on allowable expenses. So we are working through those now. Like the first ones, there is a large allocation, $3.4 million, that will go directly to students. Our team is in the process of awarding students now, and a portion of that has already been awarded. The balance is for institutions to offset expenses. And the change here, or the addition, is offset expenses and direct revenue losses. So while the earlier ones were simply expense coverage, so we could use it to cover technology, we could use it to cover cleaning supplies and plexiglass and other things related to social distancing. The CARISA dollars, we are now allowed to use to offset revenue loss. So as an example, our billing units were down this year. We are allowed to use the CARISA revenue to offset, or CARISA dollars to offset the enrollment or tuition revenue loss because our billing units were down significantly below budget. Does that make sense? So we're working with those budgets now, and I've actually talked, I believe that we will come back to you with a more comprehensive update on federal funding in its entirety, perhaps as a different work session or different board meeting, so that we can show you all of that and where we are. And then there is, as noted on here, the American Rescue Plan is a new federal stimulus program that has been approved. We have not seen an actual award yet. Are anticipating that fairly soon, but we do not have that yet.
Lisa and fellow trustees, we have we're obligated to also shift our meeting format into a formal meeting. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to just take us through the rest of the PowerPoint as you had planned. Then what we will do is we'll shift into the formal meeting for a time of question and answer so that the general public can also witness the Q&A part of this. Does that make sense?
Yep, or I'm happy. Yes, absolutely. We are at a point where we will be moving into 2021. So if you'd prefer to hold and switch.
Do we do that?
Yeah. Finish the PowerPoint then?
I think so. Why don't we do that? Again, trustees, we're trying to navigate public acts and how often we are responsible to review these documents publicly here. So this, although feels a little clumsy, it only feels clumsy because we're doing all this stuff virtually and not in person. So what we're going to do is we are actually going to shift into a public formal meeting mode right now, which includes public comment, etc. And then Lisa, what I will do is I'll just call you right back in, and you can just continue. You can just continue with your presentation, and we can continue with our dialogue. So with that, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Grand Rapids Community College Board of Trustees meeting Monday, May 3, 2021. Because this meeting is virtual, I'm going to ask each trustee to identify their location for this meeting. And again, I'm going to just go right around again, trustees. Trustee Brame.
Kenyatta Brame, from my office here in Kent County.
Thank you. Trustee Williams.
Daniel Williams here in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Trustee Lovelady Mitchell.
Randy Lovelady Mitchell, I'm in Kent County, Michigan.
Trustee Crosby.
Kathy Crosby, I'm in Granville, Michigan.
Trustee Bruinsma.
Kathleen Bruinsma. I'm in Chicago, Illinois because of a family illness.
You, Trustee Siegel,
Trustee Siegel is in Kent County.
and I'm Trustee Cucci, and I also am in Kent County. We now move on to public comment. This is the time where those of you in our audience, if you have any comments or questions you would like the board to take a look at as we deal with the agenda for this meeting, now is the time to do that. Because this meeting has only one agenda item, and that is the beginning look at an operational budget for our next academic year, we're only going to have one opportunity for public comment. So if you are in the audience and you were prepared to address the board on any matter that relates to the college, now would be your time to do that as well. We will sort through whatever comments come in, any comments that relate to our agenda, we will listen to immediately. Any comments that relate to just matters of college operations, we will hold off and we will hear those at the end of the meeting. Be so kind as to use your chat function, identify yourself by name if you will. And for those of you who are wanting to make a comment on any matter of college operations, you're also more than invited to use the email addresses for all of us. So with that, we are going to invite you, Dr. Pink, and your staff to the podium to continue to proceed with our one agenda item, and that is a look at the next year's operating budget.
Thank you, Chairperson Cucci. And to continue that conversation, I will ask Lisa Freiberger to start her PowerPoint and continue to share with you, board and trustees, what we're looking at in terms of closeout and what 21-22 is looking like. So, Mrs. Freiberger, please.
Thank you. All right. Okay, thank you. I apologize for the technical difficulties. We are going to take a look at a preliminary look at 21-22 with a strong focus on the general fund, although would be happy to answer any questions that anyone has on anything else, any other funds, whether that be our auxiliary funds, our plant fund, debt service fund, or restricted grant funds. Would take a look at 21-22. And then we will talk for just a few minutes about next steps and how this budget process will unfold through June and adoption consideration. So as we look at 2021, just a reminder that we have really three primary revenue sources: our enrollment or tuition and fees, property taxes, and state aid. So those really make up the core revenue of our general operating fund. The assumptions that we are currently using to build the budget for 21-22 are as follows. For enrollment, we are projecting a flat billing unit base. So we are projecting no change in enrollment from the current 2021 year. So we know 2021 billing units, how we measure enrollment from a financial perspective, we're down from budget. So we assume that projecting flat or a consistent with actual current year will be conservative. We are certainly seeing very positive enrollment in summer and believe that will continue into fall. We are projecting conservatively and basing that on a flat enrollment. If you'll remember, we have already approved tuition. So tuition is based upon, in this budget, is based upon what you approved in March. Which was, again, flat. We have no tuition increase built in. We were able to hold tuition flat for our students. From a property tax perspective, we are looking at a 4.5% increase. We have received preliminary information, but will not receive an actual property tax number for at least another 3 to 4 weeks. We are also anticipating, based on what we are seeing, yet another Headley rollback. Again, do not have that information yet, believe that we have accounted for that within the dollars that we have incorporated into this budget projection, but we'll have those finals within probably another month. From a state aid perspective, we are including an estimated 1.5% increase in base appropriation, plus some other items, including Renaissance Zone reimbursement, the MIPSERS offset that we talk about, with the revenue that comes through, approximately 7 million that we have to include in our expense as well. And the governor's budget did include a one-time allocation you'll see there related to some maintenance of effort issues back in 1920. We do believe that will hold. We have built that in as well. A couple of things to note on the state aid issue. One, we have two preliminary state aid budgets that we've seen. Both of them, fortunately, include increases, 1.5% here, 2%, and another one that is out at the House level. However, both of them are listed right now as one-time increases, which means that we'll receive that for this year and then have that rolled back next year. We are watching that closely because if we budget that this year and then it rolls back and resets itself, that's going to make for a bit of a challenge next year. So we are watching that very closely. The other thing I would point out here is that the House Appropriation Subcommittee for Community Colleges has offered a different allocation methodology as part of their budget. And you may have seen or heard something about that. We have been talking for some time as a college and as a board about the allocation for community colleges from the state level and how it is not necessarily an equitable one based on student size or fiscal year equated students. There is a proposal out now that would significantly reset that. Clearly, we're very early in the budget process. We do not know where that may or may not go. If that moves forward or if that moves forward in part, which again, it may or may not, but there could be a fairly significant increase within our state aid allocation, because again, we know that we are virtually at the bottom when you take state aid allocation and would divide that or allocate that out based on number of students served. So stay tuned and we will continue to keep you updated on that.
Lisa, I have a question on the state aid, that 735,000 maintenance of effort. What does that mean?
That has to do with the federal money coming into the state level and the fact that when the federal money came with it a requirement that you don't supplant. So you can't reduce the state aid that the state provides to an extent and try to move that. And you'll remember we got coronavirus relief funds and received a fairly significant cut in state aid at the last minute last year, 1920. That has to do with that.
Thank you.
I've got a question. Dr. Pink, you've told us in the past that the pandemic has had a significant number on enrollment, not just in community college, but throughout colleges throughout the United States. And one's specific to Grand Rapids and one's more asking you to look into your crystal ball. So get ready for that part of it. And so in Grand Rapids, did we see the students under the Grand Rapids promise were their numbers down? And looking out in the future, using your crystal ball, do we think like the students that we lost last year are lost forever, or is it possibly a push where they come back to us next year or the following years? What are your thoughts on that?
And yes, and thank you. Two things, and I'll do my best to tell you what this crystal ball says in that.
Exactly.
So what we've looked, as I've said, our down enrollment holistically during the pandemic reflects what we see nationally among community colleges, which is about 8 to 10%, and we are right there in that space. So we really reflect what we see nationally. Hard to say on the Promise Zone, just because this was the first year of the Promise Zone. So we didn't really have
a baseline. Okay.
Yeah, we didn't have, the first class of the Promise Zone was coming in under a pandemic. And so, but I will say this, from the numbers that we saw, we believe that that Promise Zone would do better than what those numbers were. And so my guess on that has a little crystal ball to it too. I think those numbers will look better coming fall than they did a year ago fall. So, fingers crossed on that, but I do think we'll see better numbers. As far as students who we never saw walk in the doors, I call it more the recovery side of this. We believe, and I'll tell you, Trustee Brame, it's not just locally, it's statewide. Just in last week, finishing up the work of the Student Recovery Advisory Council that the governor had appointed me to. The folks, that statewide effort, a lot of what we were saying was not only do we need to be focused on the class of 21, but most of that effort was a conversation around how do we also rewind and focus on the class of 20. And so what we have been doing here at the college, we just had a conversation about it this morning, is how to make sure that our messaging is getting out to those students who were part of that class of 20 that for whatever reason, pandemic or otherwise, did not come to college at all. And we know they're out there. And so what we have been doing is making sure, and you'll see more coming out this summer. Dave Murray, he's a machine. You'll see more coming out this summer in terms of marketing and in trying to call those students back to say, you know what, we're on the backside of this pandemic. Come to college and let's start talking about how to get your future up and running. And so you'll see more of that kind of marketing in the coming months this summer. But we do believe that we should be able to get some of those 2020 graduates back in the door coming up this fall. And I would also say that we think that's probably also to a certain extent, some of the numbers we're seeing this summer might be some of those students coming to the college as well.
Okay.
Lisa, this is Kathy Crosby. I'd like to ask a question about enrollment before you go any further.
Sure.
You said you budgeted for enrollment to be flat, which sounds great, but what I don't recall is how significant was the drop from 2 years ago? So we're budgeting flat at what? What loss?
For this fiscal year, 2021, we projected to be down approximately 3% from 1920, and we were down almost 10.
Okay, thank you very much for the reminder.
Yep, absolutely. So moving on to assumptions on the expenditure side of our general fund budget projection. For salaries, as we always do, we have based those on the most current contract information. As you know, we have settled contracts for APSS faculty and POLC, and we are in negotiations with SEBA. So we will incorporate the best data that we have for those. For meet and confer, we have incorporated into this projection, which is just a projection at this point, an increase of up to 2.5% based on merit. That is obviously subject to specific board consideration as part of the June meeting. So that is in here from a projection standpoint, but that does not mean that that's automatically approved. We did, as I mentioned earlier, put the changes back. We were able to fund some salaries, particularly in the facilities and campus police areas where their work looked different with some of the federal resources, and we have reinstated those in their entirety. And then, as always, we continue to budget for open positions. You'll see on the fringe benefit side, we do have our state health insurance cap. Remember, the state tells us what we may pay for employee health care, and that is a 3.7% increase. And then we are still budgeting MIPSERS at 28.2%. The MIPSERS rate is tied up in the state budgeting process, but we have incorporated that at 28.2%, meaning for those of our employees that are participating in MIPSERS, 28.2 cents on every salary dollar is paid into the state.
Lisa, what would be an example of employees who are not participating in MIPSERS?
There are certain employee classifications that are eligible to enter into what is called ORP, or an optional retirement plan, as opposed to entering into MIPSERS.
Got it.
So for some employees, there is a choice.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
There are some assumptions, and then I specifically want to point out there are a few increases in this budget that are called out on this slide. On the non-salary, so everything here is non-salary. We have reversed anything that was one time, as we always do. There are 4 increases that are built into this budget, again, all non-salary. The first is contractual assistance within human resources. We are seeing an increased number of postings related to some grant positions, new grants that we have obtained, which you have all heard about, as well as some significant retirements and vacancies coming. We have a significant workload increase in human resources. That said, we are very cautious at this point to add any new positions. So what we have done is added a contracted position for a year, and that is what that's covering. Then we will reevaluate based on where enrollment comes in, based on the continued high workload volume or not, and move forward from there. And then there are some smaller additions in student records for some document reader information that helps read transcripts, some website maintenance, and then within ODEI, some assistance with ongoing intergroup dialogue training. So those are all non-salary items, but they are all increases from current year budget. We have restored contingency, as we always do. We have assumed some underspending, again, as we always do. And then this last bullet, I think, is also noteworthy. We have, because we will be in our new Lakeshore facility in the fall, we have redone that entire budget, removed the rent, the lease expenses, and moved that all into operating expenses, operating staffing. We have added custodial maintenance support. We're budgeting for utilities, anything you would budget as an owner versus a lessee now. And as we had talked way back when we were going through consideration of purchase of this facility, we had talked then about annual operational savings. And we have built that in. We are seeing that in the amount of approximately $85,000 annually when we are owning versus leasing in 4 different locations. Summary, as we briefly looked at in the work session, we are projecting at this point in time a virtually balanced budget. You'll see a small surplus of $126,000 on a budget in excess of $115 million. That would bring our net assets to 21 million, or 18.3% of total annual expenditures. Just a couple brief items of note in our other funds. Our plant fund, where we account for all of our construction as well as our debt. You have been seeing in prior years some significant construction expenses, Lakeshore and Finkelstein Hall being the 2 largest. Those projects will come to a close within the next fiscal year. So you will see some budget amount, 2 million specifically for Lakeshore and 3 million for Finkelstein Hall, as we bring those projects to a close. You will also see budget for the proposed ATC Piazza project. Note that that project is fully funded through donations. Debt payments, you'll see a reduction there, approximately $500,000. That is really due to 2 things. Primarily, it's due to the refunding that you approved last spring. We were able to see some significant savings from that refunding. In addition, we have a debt series that will be fully paid off. So we are reducing our debt overall next year with 1 full series being paid. You will see increases in both revenue and expense in our other auxiliary funds, food service, parking, and printing services, not back to pre-COVID levels, but certainly beyond 2021 levels as we anticipate increased activity on our campus. And then you will see some project capital funding or capital outlay projected in our parking fund. In the plan for that are some renovations and repairs at our Lion ramp primarily. With that, next steps, we will certainly be open and available to answer any budget related or financial related questions that you might have as part of your May 17 board meeting. As you continue to look through documents, we will update you at that point in time if we have any additional new information, if we have a stated budget as an example by then, or any additional information around property tax. If not, we would bring this to you at your June 21st meeting. We would first have the truth and taxation hearing, as we do every year, to approve the tax levy, and then we would request adoption of the 21-22 budget.
Thank you, Lisa. So as Lisa mentioned, this is round one of a conversation that we'll have. A month from now, we will approve this operating budget. Lisa always impresses us with the detail to have an answer to every question that we ask. Are there other questions that we have right now for Lisa?
Lisa, the CRISA allocation of funds, I doubt whether this would happen, but that's supposed to cover deficit. And if it covered deficit with funds remaining, where would that remaining funds go?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but let me try, and then if I don't, ask me again, and I'll continue. With CRISA funding, again, it's approximately $15 million. 3.4 million of that will go out directly to students. The balance we will spend institutionally. As we are finalizing our framework, again, we had some significant challenge, I will say, getting some direct approvals from the federal government as they tried to clarify what was allowable and what wasn't. But we are looking to spend those resources, again, primarily directly related to students. We have some additional technology needs. We have some additional need for laptops. We are looking at some furniture solutions for classrooms, specifically some, I'm going to call them single desks versus the large tables that will help in our classrooms with social distancing. Right now, most of our classrooms are outfitted with large tables, and it makes them very hard to rearrange classroom spaces to allow students to be social distance. And certainly we have done it in a small number of classrooms. As we look to bring more students back, we need students to be comfortable. We need some more assistance. We are also looking at some significant outlay in what I'm going to call air purification systems in classroom buildings. So we are working through that process now with some of our facilities vendors to look at how we can continue to improve air purification across facilities. And then I think your question was around revenue, the revenue recapture. We are also with CRISA allowed to recapture lost revenue. So we are working with our auditors and calculations now, knowing, and Kenyatta, I think it was your question, or maybe Kathleen's question, that our billing units were down this year. So we had projected 3% down, and we were down almost 10. CRISA will allow us to recapture that lost tuition and then be able to reallocate it in future years as we need to maintain financial stability.
Thank you, Lisa. That clarifies for me.
That help? Okay.
Much more detail than which I needed. Thank you.
Lisa, can I assume that in previous years that food service was a profit center?
Food service is not a profit center for us. No, and not for, I would hazard to say, most educational institutions, higher ed institutions that don't have dorms and don't have a consistent food plan type option for students. Certainly, we work Creative Dining as a great partner with us. We work very closely with them. We have some negotiation with them on an ongoing basis because we want to keep prices low for students. Yep. So we ask them to be very conscious of that and actually work with them on an ongoing basis to make sure that we try to do that. We try to minimize any subsidy that we have, but we do subsidize that program.
The other factor in that, Lisa's spot on, the other factor in that, Trustee Brain, is being a campus that is about 70 to 75% part-time, which means that many of your students many of our students aren't here as very long. If most of them are, if that many of them are taking one or two classes, even with the multiple opportunities on campus that they have, they're just not here long enough in many cases. It still is imperative that we provide the opportunity Creative dining is what Lisa mentioned, and that's the one, obviously that's the one that has contractual obligation to it. But then you also have to remember that there's a couple of locations down in the G2 of Finkelstein Hall with a Subway and another small grab and go down there. And then the culinary school runs Art and Bevs over in the ATC, which in non-pandemic days, Art and Bevs is a busy spot come lunchtime. So you have those dynamics as well that that also play into that.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about with the reduced amount of traffic on campus. I'm thinking about a Subway, the restaurant downstairs. It's just more difficult for that organization to be profitable. I was thinking that the food center was a profit center, and it may no longer be a profit center, but since it wasn't from the start, my question wasn't relevant. Thank you.
Other questions at this point? Hearing none, I'll form the assumption that we are clear at this point. You've got the documentation. We all have the documentation in front of us. This will not be the last time we take a look at this. This will be taken a look at again in June. Lisa has always done a nice job of alerting us to any changes between now and then in that proposed budget. So unless we hear from her, we can make the assumption that there are no changes from between this budget and the one we'll take a look at in June. So with that, we have no public comment to deal with. That would then be the last item on this agenda. With that, I will ask trustees if you have any other comments or questions before we adjourn. Anyone? Hearing or seeing none, this meeting is now adjourned, and we will see all of us again in 2 weeks from today at our May, I think it is 17 meeting. So have a good rest of your afternoon. Good day.
Thank you.
Thank
Nice
you.
job, Dr. Pink, Lisa.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Is Lisa a doctor as well? All right, make sure I'm not calling one person doctor, another one not.
Noah, Kenyatta and I are